Chapter 1. The flight was suddenly cancelled, so I dragged my suitcase back home. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw a shredded black sock lying on the floor. This was the 8th time Miles Thompson had brought different girls home. In the bathroom, the sound of running water mixed with the cheerful laughter of a young girl echoed. I didn't cry, nor did I cause a scene. I simply sat quietly on the sofa, waiting for them to finish. Everyone thought I would, as always, continue being the blind admirer of Miles Thompson. But no one knew, the bright moonlight in my heart had returned. After tonight, Miles Thompson, the stand-in, would be kicked out. The sound of water in the bathroom suddenly stopped. I calmly sat on the sofa in the living room, watching as a girl, completely unclothed, walked straight out of the bathroom. Her skin was fair and smooth, with a vivid red rose painted on her right chest. It was clear this was Miles Thompson's handiwork. He was an artist who particularly enjoyed painting on young women's bodies to find inspiration for his creations. A few seconds later, Miles Thompson also emerged from the bathroom. His hair was still wet, a few strands falling over his forehead, and his white shirt clung tightly to his toned abs. The girl joyfully threw herself into Miles Thompson's arms, her small face full of admiration. "Miles, your way of creating art is so unique, I love it." Miles Thompson lightly patted her on the hip, his tone teasing and playful, "As long as you like it." The girl leaned in, intending to kiss him, but then caught sight of me sitting on the sofa. Startled, she hurriedly grabbed her clothes from the floor to cover herself, timidly hiding behind Miles Thompson. Miles Thompson turned to glance at me, then indifferently said to the girl, "You should leave now." The girl didn't want to go, but was still coldly pushed out the door by Miles Thompson. After seeing the girl off, Miles Thompson noticed the suitcase placed by the door. Turning his head as if nothing had happened, he asked me, "Why didn't you fly?" Calmly, I replied, "The flight was cancelled." "Oh." Miles Thompson rubbed his forehead and sat down beside me. The sofa sank significantly under his weight. He rested his head on my lap, closed his eyes, and said, "Been running around all afternoon, my head's killing me. Give me a massage, will you?" I lowered my head to look at Miles Thompson. His sharp jawline, straight nose, and slightly raised eyebrows exuded a touch of arrogance. He looked exactly like the man I once loved. Back then, to win over Miles Thompson, I willingly became his blind, obsessive admirer. When he told me to go east, I would never dare to go west. Even as women came and went from his side, I never cried or caused a scene. I even thoughtfully cleaned up the battlefield for him. It was that obedience and understanding that made me stand out among those pursuing Miles Thompson. On sleepless nights, I liked to trace the contours of his eyes, eyebrows, and sharp jawline with my hand. And quietly think of someone else in my heart. Ethan Carter. Miles Thompson's friends often praised him for knowing how to tame his wife, complimenting me for being gentle and understanding. Each time I would only smile without a word. I used to think life would continue in this hazy, ambiguous way. But tonight, on my way back from the airport, I received a call from Ethan Carter. "Samantha King, I'm back." Ethan Carter's voice was deep and warm, soothing yet gripping, as if it reached through the receiver and clenched my heart. "Miles Thompson." For the last time I traced my fingers over the contours of his face. "Let's break up." Time seemed to stand still. Miles Thompson froze for a moment, then opened his eyes to look at me. "Because of that girl?" I wanted to say no. But Miles Thompson had already sat up, his deep eyes filled with mockery as they pierced into me. "Fine. If you want to break up, then let's break up." Miles Thompson didn't take this seriously at all. He thought I was being petty, jealous. After all, every time we argued before, I was always the one to make amends. Miles Thompson, always prideful, could never lower himself for anyone. So, when he came out of the shower and saw me packing my suitcase in the bedroom, his demeanor shifted to an oddly unsettling irritation. Miles Thompson stormed into the room, yanking out every neatly folded piece of clothing from the suitcase. "This coat, I bought it for you in France last year. This dress, I gave it to you as a gift last month." The last piece of clothing in the suitcase was thrown to the floor, landing right in front of me. He smirked, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "Samantha King, all of these things were bought by me for you. With the meager amount you earn each month, do you think you can afford to wear these luxury items?" Miles Thompson grabbed my arm and pulled me in front of the dressing mirror. He pinched my chin, forcing me to look at myself in the mirror. "Samantha King, do you think my act of painting on women's bodies for inspiration is filthy? But what right do you have to act high and mighty with me? Haven't you been living off me for years? Look at yourself, from head to toe, inside and out. Is there anything that I didn't buy for you? You want to break up? Fine. Then strip everything off and leave. Leave behind everything that belongs to me." I didn't cry or make a scene. I simply freed myself from Miles Thompson's grasp. In front of him, I began to remove every piece of clothing I wore, as if shedding layers of chains. Miles Thompson never understood. I never liked these luxury items. He forced them on me, made me wear them. That's why he always manipulated me with words. "Samantha King, I'm a famous artist now. Being my girlfriend is the greatest fortune of your life. So don't embarrass me. When you go out, be mindful of how you speak, and your fashion sense must be trendy and classy." To play the role of Miles Thompson's girlfriend, I had to wear ill-fitting outfits, endure painful high heels I disliked, attend places I hated, and speak words that went against my heart. High heels were beautiful but torturous. The skin on my heels tore, bled, healed, and eventually turned into calluses. Stripping down to just my underwear, I bent down to retrieve a cheap tracksuit I had once bought for myself from under the wardrobe. Miles Thompson always said it looked cheap, but I found it the most comfortable thing to wear. Finally, I packed my ID card, passport, and phone charger into a bag, then looked up at Miles Thompson. "Can I leave now?" With that, I brushed past him and headed toward the door. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, Miles Thompson suddenly made a phone call behind me, deliberately putting it on speaker. From the other end came a sweet, coquettish voice. "Mr. Thompson, why are you calling so late? Did you miss me?" Miles Thompson chuckled softly, replying with a simple yes. "Sweetheart, send me your address. I'll come over right away." I stopped listening because I no longer cared. From now on, whoever Miles Thompson wants to collaborate with, or draw inspiration from, has nothing to do with me anymore. I didn't look back, closed the door, and walked away. Behind me, something was forcefully thrown at the door by Miles Thompson, producing a loud bang. Through the door, I could clearly hear him yelling, "Samantha King, don't you dare regret this. I swear, in this life or the next, I'll never come back to you." After the breakup, I deleted and blocked all forms of contact with Miles Thompson. Day by day, I lived a quiet life between 2 points, home and work. Until today, after work, I received a call from my high school class president. "Samantha King, this weekend, I'm hosting a class reunion at Blue Pavilion Bar in the evening. Ethan Carter will be there too." For several days, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Finally, the weekend arrived. I rummaged through my wardrobe, trying on more than a dozen outfits. I even spent 2 hours in the bathroom doing my makeup. I arrived at Blue Pavilion half an hour early. In the elevator, as the numbers on the screen climbed higher and higher, my heartbeat quickened in sync. Unfortunately, when the elevator doors opened, I ran into one of Miles Thompson's friends. He looked at me, surprised and delighted. "Sis-in-law? You're here to see Thompson, aren't you?" Miles Thompson's friend was drunk, staggering as he walked, but he was incredibly strong. No matter what I said or how I refused, he dragged me and shoved me into the room ahead. Inside, the room was filled with dim lights and lively chatter. As soon as I stepped in, I heard Miles Thompson's voice. "Samantha King is beautiful, sure, but after a while, that's all there is to it. If it weren't for her being obedient and compliant, I would have dumped her long ago." Laughter erupted from the people around. The girl sitting on Miles Thompson's lap wrapped her arms around his neck, lifting a cherry to his lips. Their lips were almost touching. When they saw me, everyone in the room froze in shock. The girl stopped as well. The atmosphere in the room turned icy and suffocating, as if the air had been sucked out. Breaking the silence, one of Miles Thompson's friends spoke up. "I told you, didn't I? Sister-in-law would definitely come looking for Mr. Thompson to make up. And look at her, dressing so beautifully, it's clear how much she loves him." The man pulled me forward, taking the opportunity to give me a shove, making me stumble a few steps closer. "Sister-in-law, don't blame me for being blunt. A man as exceptional as Mr. Thompson has countless women dreaming of him. If you don't hurry up and flatter him, and he gets snatched away, you'll regret it when it's too late. I'm saying this for your own good, sister-in-law. With your current circumstances, there's no way you could find a man better than Mr. Thompson. You should be grateful." Glances were exchanged among the people in the room, accompanied by mocking smiles. They all turned their eyes to me, waiting for me to bow my head, apologize to Miles Thompson, and beg for forgiveness through tears and regret. Miles Thompson's hand continued to caress the waist of the girl perched on his lap, but his gaze was fixed on me, his smile full of ridicule. "Samantha King, stop using those tired old tricks of playing hard to get. I don't always have the patience for these childish games of yours. I'll let it slide this time, but don't let there be a next time, understood?" Miles Thompson gestured for the girl on his lap to stand up, treating her as if she were a pet. He waved me over. "Come here." Miles Thompson signaled with his eyes, motioning for me to sit on his lap, his voice arrogant. "Samantha King, pour me a glass of wine. Consider it your apology, and this time I'll let it slide." Hearing this, everyone in the room burst into lively cheers. "Sister-in-law, hurry up. Thompson is giving you a chance to back down gracefully, better seize it." That's right, that's right. Sister-in-law should punish herself with 3 more glasses." Under the expectant gazes of everyone, I walked toward Miles Thompson. Leaning down, I grabbed a glass of beer from the table and splashed it straight into his face. A few strands of Miles Thompson's hair got wet, sticking to his forehead. His eyes, shut tightly in shock, opened wide with fury moments later. The room instantly fell silent. Under the dim lights, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Miles Thompson gritted his teeth, his glare filled with a burning rage. I coldly said, "Have you sobered up yet, Miles Thompson? If you didn't hear me clearly that day, I'll say it again now, in front of everyone. Miles Thompson, we're done." With that, I turned and walked away without looking back. A friend couldn't help but ask him, "Thompson, are you really not going to chase after her? This time, sister-in-law seems genuinely determined." Miles Thompson kicked the coffee table hard, sending the fruit platter and glasses flying, shattering on the floor. "Chase after her? Humph, she's not worth it. I want to see how she fares without me. Samantha King is nothing." Chapter 2. The class reunion tonight had over a dozen former high school classmates attending. It had been a long time since everyone last met. They raised their glasses and chatted lively together. The class president, who used to be close to Ethan Carter during school days, told me, "Ethan Carter came here today because of you, Samantha King. Back then, we all thought you two would end up together after graduation. Who would have guessed that Ethan Carter's biological parents would suddenly show up and take him abroad?" That year, I finally learned the truth. The boy who once ate cold steamed buns and pickled vegetables with me in a small village, where winters didn't even afford a decent cotton coat, and who was always called the little beggar, Ethan Carter, was, in fact, the long-lost son of a wealthy family. Just then, Ethan Carter pushed the door open and stepped in. Instantly, he became the center of attention. I turned my head. Ethan Carter stood a head taller than everyone in the room, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. Broad shoulders and a slim waist, he looked like a model straight out of a magazine cover. "Wow, isn't this the legendary Carter from our class? After all these years, you finally decided to show up. Ethan Carter, you're late today, you'll have to drink a few extra rounds later." Ethan Carter responded politely, his voice warm, "Of course. His gaze swept across the room before suddenly stopping in one direction. When our eyes met, I could clearly feel my heartbeat racing, as if it were about to burst out of my chest. In the middle of the gathering, as I stepped out of the restroom, Ethan Carter suddenly grabbed me and pulled me forcefully into the narrow staircase nearby. The staircase was cramped, dimly lit. The smell of alcohol on Ethan Carter was overwhelming as he growled, "Why didn't you reply to my messages?" I turned away, avoiding his gaze. "Work kept me busy, I forgot." "You're lying." His hot breath brushed against my face, his eyes blazing with a mix of passion and fury. "Samantha King, why didn't you tell me that my mother reached out to you 2 years ago?" In truth, Ethan Carter's mother had sought me out 2 years ago. She told me Ethan Carter already had a fiancée. That girl had also graduated from Stanford, came from a wealthy family, and was a perfect match for him. She even showed me their picture. In the photograph, the girl stood beside Ethan Carter with a sweet smile, and the two of them looked stunning together. Samantha King, I never once thought about marrying her. Ethan Carter grabbed my wrist with one hand, pinning it against the wall, his gaze unwavering. "This time, I've come back with enough courage to leave no escape. No one can stop us from being together anymore. So, Samantha King." He tightened his grip slightly, his strong hand tilting my chin upward. "Break up with that Thompson guy and come back to me." I trembled slightly, lifting my head to look at him in astonishment. In the next moment, Ethan Carter tilted my chin higher, his lips pressing down on mine, the fire in his kiss seemingly erasing every trace anyone else had ever left on me. Since that night, every day Ethan Carter would hold a bouquet of roses in a different color, waiting right outside my office building, always on time to pick me up after work. Tonight, I worked overtime and came down a bit late. Through the glass door, I saw Ethan Carter leaning slightly against his car, holding a bouquet of blue roses. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black coat that accentuated his broad shoulders and toned physique. I couldn't help myself, I quickened my pace and ran toward him with a beaming smile. As always, no matter how many people were watching, he would open his arms to embrace me first, pulling me into a warm hug with his gentle smile. I took the bouquet from his hands and brought it to my nose for a sniff. Not as fragrant as the pink roses yesterday. Ethan Carter lightly pinched the tip of my nose. "You're getting harder to please by the day." He opened the car door himself and courteously shielded my head with his hand. "Hop in, my lady. Tonight, I'm treating you to Japanese food." I hugged the bouquet, smiling as I slid into the passenger seat. "Then I'll have to eat a feast big enough to make you regret it." But what I didn't expect was to run into Miles Thompson at the restaurant. In the middle of our meal, Ethan Carter stepped out to take a phone call. I was looking down, scrolling through my phone, when I suddenly heard a familiar mocking voice. "Samantha King, don't tell me you found out I'd be dining here tonight and decided to wait for me on purpose, huh?" I looked up. In front of me stood Miles Thompson, one arm tightly wrapped around the waist of a girl wearing a crop top, both of them positioned right by my table. They seemed to have just arrived, with a server trailing behind to guide them. The girl playfully asked Miles Thompson, "Who's this lady, huh?" Chewing gum with his usual arrogant demeanor, Miles Thompson replied, "An ex-girlfriend from a poor background who likes to pretend she's classy." The girl covered her mouth and giggled, then turned to the server and asked, "Isn't this restaurant supposed to be the most upscale in the area, only serving elite members? How did they let stray cats and dogs in here?" Her gaze swept over the sea urchin and caviar on my table before she turned back to Miles Thompson, saying, "Wow, this table must have cost a fortune." Miles Thompson tilted his head and reminded the server, "Keep an eye on this one. First time a country bumpkin's been somewhere fancy like this, who knows, she might skip out on the bill." The young server, flustered by Miles Thompson's words, broke into a nervous sweat. I fully understood Miles Thompson's intentions. Calmly, I set down my chopsticks, wiped my hands with a warm towel, and spoke in an even tone, "Miles Thompson, you can live your life without spitting venomous words. There's no need to try and put on a show in front of me. The girl sneered, her tone mocking. You're using reverse psychology to get my brother's attention, aren't you? When people don't know what to say, they often just want to laugh. The waiter seemed unable to bear it any longer and was about to speak up for me when Ethan Carter returned. Ethan Carter walked straight to my side. The dark tailored suit he wore perfectly accentuated his broad shoulders and toned waist. He looked down at Miles Thompson, his voice deep and cold. With a bit of money in your pocket and some superficial fame, you think you can trample on others' dignity like that? Thompson, you think you're so great, don't you? Miles Thompson rolled his eyes, sizing up Ethan Carter from head to toe, his gaze full of disdain. Who the hell are you? I stood up, hooked my arm around Ethan Carter's, and smiled as I spoke to Miles Thompson. Let me formally introduce him. This is Ethan Carter, my boyfriend. Miles Thompson's expression darkened instantly. His eyes landed on our tightly clasped hands. In his gaze, there was first confusion, then a surge of anger like a violent storm. I knew it, Samantha King. You've been my lackey for so long, how could you suddenly change your attitude? Miles Thompson's eyes turned sharp, locking onto Ethan Carter. How long have you two known each other? Is it because of him that you want to break up with me? Ethan Carter interrupted him, his voice calm. I'm Samantha King's first love. The atmosphere felt as though an invisible hand was suffocating it, making every breath a struggle. As if realizing something, Miles Thompson pressed his lips tightly together. His gaze locking onto me with an intensity that seemed as if he wanted to tear me apart. At that moment, 7 or 8 towering security guards entered the room. They stood at attention in unison, bowing respectfully as they greeted Ethan Carter. Good evening, Director Carter. This scene left not only Miles Thompson and the woman beside him stunned, but I was equally taken aback. Ethan Carter pulled me into his arms, as if to declare his claim. His cold gaze fell on Miles Thompson. Throw these two out. Yes, sir. The security guards moved forward in unison. Miles Thompson, who had never been humiliated like this before, pointed a finger at them and roared, let's see if you dare lay a hand on me. The woman beside him, frightened, hid behind Miles Thompson, but her words were still defiant. Do you even know who he is? This is Miles Thompson, a famous artist, a well-known figure in society. If you touch him, I guarantee social media will be tearing you apart by tomorrow. The security guards didn't bother to respond. Seeing their stubborn resistance, the guards decisively grabbed each of them by the arms, effortlessly lifting Miles Thompson and the woman off the ground and tossing them out of the restaurant, leaving them sprawled on the pavement with their limbs flailing. Thanks to the woman's loud screaming, the scene attracted quite a crowd of onlookers, many of whom began recording the incident. The clips quickly made their way online. In less than an hour, the video of Miles Thompson being thrown out of the restaurant had climbed to the top of the trending searches. On the way home, I sat in the passenger seat and scrolled through online comments. Someone had stepped forward to criticize Miles Thompson. I've hated him for a long time. Just because he knows how to draw a few strokes, he thinks he's a genius, always acting like a superstar. Being late and leaving early is a daily occurrence for him. Miles Thompson doesn't respect others. Last time, during a collaborative art exhibition with his company, just because my colleague accidentally misplaced a painting, he scolded her harshly on the spot. That poor girl went home and was sick for days afterward. The comments below even attached a video of Miles Thompson berating someone, each word dripping with insult, while the poor young woman could only sob uncontrollably. Netizens unanimously criticized him, and Miles Thompson's reputation plummeted to rock bottom. But I knew all too well, Miles Thompson's PR team had always been meticulous. This couldn't be so simple. There was only one possibility. This was Ethan Carter's plan, a long-calculated act of retaliation. I put my phone down, turned to look at Ethan Carter, who was driving, and softly said, "Thank you, President Carter, for stepping in to help me." Ethan Carter glanced at me, his face darkened, and he lightly pinched my nose. "If you call me president again, you'll see what happens tonight." I let out a playful whimper, like a little animal being teased. It was only later that night I realized Ethan Carter was one of the shareholders of that restaurant. Chapter 3. The car sped quickly toward home. As soon as he stepped through the door, Ethan Carter couldn't hold back and pushed me against the wall, kissing me fervently. The buttons on my shirt popped off, scattering everywhere. The motion sensor light at the entrance kept flickering on and off, each time like the rapid breaths of the space around us. The kiss lasted for quite a while. When I was completely limp in his arms, barely able to breathe, he finally let go. Ethan Carter's rough fingers lightly brushed against my swollen lips, his breath warm against my face, his deep gaze lingering on me for a few seconds. "Samantha King, do you know what I was thinking about the entire way home? I was thinking, did that Thompson guy ever kiss you like this?" He swept the bangs from my forehead, his thick lashes lowering, his eyes glinting with a dangerous and possessive light. "Just imagining you kissing him drives me mad with jealousy, makes me want to kill him immediately. So, Samantha King, why were you with him?" Ethan's gaze was cold and domineering, making me feel utterly oppressed. I weakly pressed my hands against his chest, my voice growing softer, "Because his profile looked so much like yours. When I heard you were engaged, I completely broke down. At that moment, you disappeared without a trace. My grandmother fell gravely ill, and all the pressure crushed me. My hair fell out in clumps, and I relied on sleeping pills just to get a little rest each night. I once thought of going abroad to find you. But with my grandmother in the hospital, I couldn't leave." I trembled, tears streaming down my cheeks. At that very moment, Miles Thompson appeared. I clung to him like a drowning person, grasping at a lifeline, seeing him as my emotional anchor. "Just by looking at him, I felt as though you were right there with me. I knew it. Was wrong, knew he wasn't the right person, but I just wanted to keep living, just wanted to survive." Before I could finish, Ethan Carter lowered his head and kissed me passionately. Our tears mingled with the kiss, salty and full of anguish. Ethan Carter's voice trembled as he whispered an apology. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He lifted me up effortlessly and laid me gently on the bed. Ethan Carter leaned down, continuing to kiss me, and in his arms, I felt myself melting. From my lips to my neck, from my neck to my collarbone. Ethan Carter gently lifted my leg, his fingertips brushing lightly against me, making my body tremble uncontrollably. The entire night, he seemed completely out of control. But he still didn't say a single word about why he disappeared 2 years ago. I didn't dare to ask, afraid of shattering this tender moment. The next half-month, outside of work hours, I was almost always by Ethan Carter's side. When he worked overtime, I quietly sat next to him reading a book. When he was free, I took him to eat at street food stalls. After eating, we drove to the beach, just like when we were kids playing together. I walked barefoot along the shore, one hand holding my canvas shoes, the other splashing seawater toward him. Ethan Carter couldn't dodge in time, his shirt instantly soaked. He pretended to be angry, quickly stepped toward me, and hoisted me onto his shoulder. I struggled, kicking my legs wildly in the air, laughing and pleading, "I was wrong, okay? Ethan Carter, put me down." Ethan Carter lightly patted my bottom. "Save your strength, you'll need it to scream later." The moon hung high, its gentle silver light spreading across the sea. Outside the car, the waves lapped against the sandy shore, but they weren't as rhythmic as the tempo inside the car. In the back seat, our fingers intertwined. Ethan Carter lightly bit my earlobe, his deep, husky voice repeating in my ear, "Samantha King, I love you." On the 5th day of Ethan Carter's business trip, I received a call from one of Miles Thompson's friends. "Sister-in-law, you should come to the hospital to check on Mr. Thompson. He got into a fight at the bar tonight and is now in the emergency room. Even when unconscious, he kept calling your name." I was standing at the counter in a shopping mall, picking out a watch for Ethan Carter. After hearing this, I still handed the watch I had chosen to the staff. "This one, please." "Thank you." The person on the other end hesitated for a moment. "Sister-in-law? Did you hear what I said?" I turned around, leaned against the counter, and calmly replied, "If he's in the emergency room, then you all should take good care of him. I'm not a doctor, going there won't save him." And one more thing, don't call me again about anything related to Miles Thompson. I don't care. After saying that, I hung up without hesitation. After paying, I happily left the shopping mall, carrying the carefully wrapped watch. On the way, I also stopped by the supermarket to buy more ingredients, because Ethan Carter would be home tonight. I wanted to personally cook him a meal. Around 7 in the evening, the doorbell rang. I happily ran from the kitchen to open the door. But the moment I saw the person standing in front of me, the smile on my face froze instantly. It was Ethan Carter's mother. The living room was eerily silent, with only the ticking sound of the clock on the wall breaking the stillness. Ethan Carter's mother sat on the sofa, occasionally twisting the large jade ring on her middle finger, her eyes scanning the entire room. I poured a cup of warm water and carefully placed it on the tea table in front of her. "Samantha, sit down. I have something to talk to you about." Ethan Carter's mother exuded an overwhelming presence. I sat down on the sofa opposite her, suddenly feeling clumsy and uneasy. She pulled a marriage certificate out of an orange Hermes bag and handed it to me. "This is the marriage certificate of Ethan Carter and Nina Carter. 2 years ago, they registered their marriage overseas." I stared intently at the marriage certificate in my hand, my entire body stiff as if my soul had just been drained. My eyes were filled with nothing but endless confusion and astonishment. "Samantha, I assume Ethan Carter has already told you about his marriage." Ethan Carter's mother deliberately searched through the photo album on her phone, pulling out a picture taken on the day they registered their marriage and showing it to me. Looking at the familiar face on the screen, I instinctively clenched the hem of my shirt, my knuckles turning pale. Then, she played a video. In the video, a woman named Nina Carter was lying in an ICU room, her body connected to countless tubes. My lips trembled slightly, wanting to ask something, but it felt as though my throat was being choked, and I couldn't utter a single word. Ethan Carter's mother put her phone away, looked at me calmly, and said, "The day Ethan Carter returned to the country, he left Nina Carter a divorce agreement. Nina Carter saw it and drove after him to the airport, trying to stop him. Unfortunately, it had just rained that day. The roads were slippery, and her car overturned on the highway. Nina Carter suffered multiple fractures, severe head trauma, and has been in the ICU for half a month. The doctor said that even if she survives, she will remain in a vegetative state. Therefore, Ethan Carter can never get a divorce in this lifetime." After Ethan Carter's mother left, I sat alone, huddled in a corner, arms wrapped tightly around my knees, carefully recalling every word she said tonight. She recounted how, years ago, Ethan Carter's father had offended someone. When Ethan Carter was just 3 days old, he was taken away. During her postpartum confinement, she attempted suicide several times, but failed. For many years, they never gave up searching for Ethan Carter. However, 20 years ago, the resources were too limited, and finding someone was like searching for a needle in a haystack. During that time, they considered having another child. But due to her severely weakened health after childbirth, she could no longer conceive. Their family had a long-standing tradition of running a business passed down through generations. The Carter family's achievements today did not come easily, they were the result of relentless efforts by 3 generations. They bore the responsibility of the prosperity and livelihood of thousands of families within the corporation. Ethan Carter's father, burdened for so long, eventually succumbed to failing health. Shortly after they found Ethan Carter, he was diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer. The young emperor returned but failed to win everyone's favor. Taking advantage of this, a rebellion arose, plunging the corporation into a dire crisis. Nina Carter's father was one of the corporation's long-standing shareholders, highly respected. It was only when Ethan Carter married Nina Carter that the Carter family agreed to support him. Ethan Carter's father's health deteriorated day by day. On his deathbed, he tearfully forced Ethan Carter into a marriage alliance with the Carter family. "Consider this my debt to you. But Ethan Carter, you must shoulder the responsibility of the Carter family, it's your duty, your legacy." Ethan Carter refused. He was confined for 3 months, completely cut off from the outside world. During that time, Ethan Carter's mother publicly announced his engagement to Nina Carter, causing a media frenzy. It wasn't until Ethan Carter's father passed away that they finally released him. Nina Carter loved Ethan Carter. To marry him, she agreed to all the conditions he set. That marriage lasted 2 years. Throughout those 2 years, Ethan Carter poured all his energy into work, often collapsing from exhaustion and ending up in the hospital. Finally, with the Carter family's assistance, he managed to revive the corporation. But on the day they were to finalize their divorce, Nina Carter changed her mind. However, Ethan Carter was resolute in leaving. Currently, the Carter family has openly declared that if Ethan Carter insists on a divorce, they will sell all their shares to a rival company, cutting off the lifeline of the corporation. This means that all of Ethan Carter's efforts over the past 2 years will be in vain, and the Carter Corporation will once again fall into crisis. This time, Ethan Carter's mother did not force me to leave. From beginning to end, she remained very calm. Before leaving, she even hugged me, her voice filled with compassion. "Samantha, I understand how painful this feels, like being stabbed in the heart over and over. Because years ago, I also had to make such a sacrifice. Believe me, Ethan Carter's heart is surely hurting even more than yours. For those born into a family like ours, we never had the right to choose from the start." In the end, her voice choked slightly as she patted my head and said, "Samantha King, don't blame Ethan Carter. He truly has done his best." Due to the delayed flight, Ethan Carter arrived later than expected. As they were nearing my neighborhood, the driver suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Mr. Carter, isn't that the lady's car?" Ethan Carter, who had been resting with his eyes closed in the back seat, immediately opened his eyes wide and stared at his mother's car as it drove past. His heart sank, as though it skipped a beat. He could already guess why his mother had come. Before boarding the plane, Ethan Carter received a call from Nina Carter's father. "Ethan Carter, Nina is my only daughter. She loves you so deeply, yet you betrayed her. I will definitely settle this score with you. If you continue to get involved with that King girl, I have hundreds of ways to make her disappear from this world." The car stopped in front of my apartment building, and Ethan Carter told the driver to leave. But he remained seated in the car, not immediately heading upstairs. The rear window rolled down halfway. Ethan Carter sat inside, his head lowered as he stared at the ring box in his hand. One cigarette after another was lit and smoked to the end. This ring had been custom-made long ago. He had planned to propose to me after divorcing Nina Carter. The tip of his finger was burned by the cigarette that had burned down to the very end, but Ethan Carter felt no pain. When the last cigarette was extinguished, he finally opened the car door and walked upstairs. Chapter 4. The doorbell rang. I opened the door and, upon seeing Ethan Carter, smiled brightly while waving the spoon in my hand. "Dinner's almost ready. Go wash your hands." Ethan Carter looked slightly startled but then smiled and nodded, "All right." During dinner, Ethan Carter seemed a bit off, not quite cheerful. I tried to cheer him up, sharing a few jokes I had recently read online. A few times, I laughed so hard that I clutched my stomach, tears streaming down my face. Ethan Carter watched me for a few seconds, then reached out to wipe away my tears. "You're all grown up, yet you tell jokes that make even yourself laugh until you cry." After saying that, he lowered his head and continued eating. I asked him, "Why are you just eating without saying anything?" He replied, "Your cooking is so good, I want to savor this moment and have a few more bowls." After dinner, I went into the kitchen to wash the dishes. From behind, Ethan Carter hugged me tightly. "Samantha King, I want to stay with you forever." His embrace was so firm, as if he wanted to melt me into his body. I paused, removed my rubber gloves, and gently wiped the damp corners of my eyes with my fingers. Then I turned around with a smile, looked at him, and said, "We'll always be together. Even though I can't always be by your side, I will love you forever, Ethan Carter." I don't know if I was imagining it, but Ethan Carter's eyes seemed to light up briefly, carrying a hint of surprise. I rested my head on his shoulder, wrapping my arms tightly around him. "Ethan Carter, I suddenly want to visit Hilltown. Will you come with me? Hilltown is where Ethan Carter and I grew up. Even though life there was tough, it holds all my most beautiful memories. Ethan Carter's arms around me suddenly stiffened. I could even hear his breathing grow quicker. As if afraid I would disappear, Ethan Carter's palm gripped the back of my neck, pressing my face against his chest, refusing to let go. All right, we'll go back. Before returning to Hilltown, I went to the mall to buy some local specialties, planning to share them with the villagers. Unexpectedly, in the parking lot, I ran into Nina Carter's mother. In the cafe, soft music played in the background. Nina Carter's mother and I sat at the table by the window. She slightly lifted her head, the diamond necklace around her neck sparkling with her movements. Without beating around the bush, she got straight to the point. Girls like you, I've seen plenty. Coming from small, impoverished places, afraid of hardship, so when you meet a wealthy man, you cling to him. Her voice carried an air of arrogance, each word spoken as if squeezed through her teeth, revealing obvious disdain. But you should know, Ethan Carter is married to my daughter. They are a perfect match, a legitimate husband and wife. And you? You're just a third party intruding on their marriage. I raised my head, my gaze meeting hers directly, a faint smile playing on my lips. My demeanor was calm but not submissive. You're my elder, so I should address you as aunt. Yes, I come from a small place, but I am independent and have always strived to live a good life. When I was a student, I worked hard in my studies and got into a prestigious university. After graduating, I worked diligently and earned my living through my own abilities. If you want to clarify who came first, then I knew Ethan Carter before your daughter did, and we loved each other first. I took $200,000 from my wallet and placed it on the table. And, I don't believe that being from a humble background means I should see myself as inferior. Coffee is the same, if you can drink it, so can I. Besides, Ethan Carter himself rose from a rural background, yet you still married your daughter to him. With that, I picked up my handbag, ready to leave. Nina Carter's mother frowned and raised her voice. Who taught you to speak to your elders like that? Do you even know what respect and hierarchy mean? Sharp tongue, good at arguing, no wonder Ethan Carter is under your control. She was so furious that she ground her teeth and suddenly grabbed the coffee cup on the table, throwing it straight at me. The speed was too fast, I couldn't dodge in time. But just at that moment, Miles Thompson appeared. He shielded my head in his arms. The entire cup of coffee splashed onto the back of his shirt. I looked up at him in astonishment. Miles Thompson also looked down at me, a strange gentleness flickering in his eyes. He was still wearing a hospital gown under his coat. Miles Thompson grabbed my wrist, pulled me to my feet, and turned to glare at Nina Carter's mother, his gaze icy. I'm mentally ill. Killing someone wouldn't land me in prison. Try laying a hand on Samantha King one more time. Looking at Miles Thompson with his disheveled hair, bandaged hands, needle marks all over his arms, and his hospital gown, Nina Carter's mother was clearly terrified and didn't dare say another word. Miles Thompson let out a cold snort and dragged me out of the cafe. Leaving the cafe, Miles Thompson kept following me. The bandage on his hand was soaked with blood, but he didn't seem to care about the wound tearing open, determined to block my path. I've investigated Ethan Carter. He's already married abroad, did you know that? He's just playing with your feelings, Samantha King. I didn't reply, sidestepped him, and continued walking forward. Miles Thompson chased after me again, gripping my shoulders tightly, his eyes filled with disbelief as he stared at my face. So, you knew everything all along? You knew he was married, yet you still stayed with him? I pushed Miles Thompson away. Who I'm with has nothing to do with you. Miles Thompson let out a cold laugh. Samantha King, weren't you always so proud of yourself? And now you've become the other woman for him. Do you have any self-respect left? I ignored his words, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. My finger hovered over the call button. Miles Thompson, if you keep harassing me, I'll report you for sexual harassment. Miles Thompson's eyes turned red, perhaps out of anger. In the end, he raised his hands as if in surrender, gritting his teeth as he said, "Fine, Samantha King. Consider me foolish. Instead of staying put in the hospital, I came out here to deal with your matters." Miles Thompson angrily kicked over a trash can by the roadside, cursing as he walked away. I watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance, my hand slowly lowering the phone. I lifted my head, trying hard to hold back the tears, but the bitter feeling in my heart continued to surge relentlessly. A week later, I returned to Hilltown with Ethan Carter. Since my grandmother passed away, I hadn't visited this place even once. I brought local specialties to share with the villagers. The children excitedly ran around Ethan Carter and me, their laughter echoing everywhere. Ethan Carter's adoptive parents had moved away long ago. His biological parents, in gratitude for them adopting and raising Ethan Carter after he was abandoned at the train station, had bought them a large house in the city and given them a substantial sum of money to ensure a comfortable retirement. I took Ethan Carter to my grandmother's grave and placed a bouquet of chrysanthemums on it. "Grandma, I brought Ethan Carter to visit you." When we were little, Ethan Carter's adoptive family was also very poor. During holidays and festivals, whenever my grandmother made stew, she would always tell me to invite Ethan Carter over to eat with us, and she would give him her own portion. She often said that children need proper nourishment while they're growing. Ethan Carter always felt a deep regret because he couldn't return when his grandmother passed away. Dressed in a proper suit, he knelt straight before her grave, bowing his head 3 times with great force. His eyes reddened multiple times, but he tried hard not to let the tears fall. On the way down from the mountain, Ethan Carter and I passed by the village elementary school. As children, we used to walk several miles every day to attend school here. The schoolyard has improved significantly now, with a smooth cement surface, no longer the dusty scene where the wind would send dirt flying everywhere like before. At that moment, a little boy and girl were chasing each other, flying a kite in the schoolyard. I raised my hand to shield my eyes from the sun and looked up at the kite soaring high and far into the sky. The clear laughter of the children echoed around us. I couldn't help but exclaim, "I really miss being a kid." Happiness was so simple back then. Ethan Carter wrapped his arm around my shoulder, pointed toward the restroom, and said, "Do you remember the old restroom over there?" I tried to recall. Around 5th grade, some girls in the class teased me in the restroom. They called me an orphan, saying I had no father and no mother. I refused and fought back against them. But they had the advantage in numbers, using it to bully me. The girl leading them grabbed my pigtails and yanked so hard it hurt terribly, making me scream. At that very moment, Ethan Carter kicked open the door to the girls' bathroom. It was the first time I saw him angry. Though not physically imposing, he stood firmly in front of me, shielding me from them. He kicked the girl in the stomach with force and gritted his teeth as he said, "From now on, anyone who dares to bully Samantha King will answer to me every single time." As the memory faded into the present, I smiled and rested my head on Ethan Carter's shoulder. Ever since that day, whenever they saw me, they stayed far away. Nobody at school dared to mess with me anymore. Ethan Carter gently tapped my nose and said, "I told you I'd protect you, and I meant it." Ethan Carter was always a man of his word. When I was 3 years old, my mother passed away from a severe illness. My father moved to the city for work and remarried. Back then, I would sit every day on the worn-out doorstep of my grandmother's house, eyes fixed on the distant dirt road, hoping my father would suddenly appear to take me home. One day, my father finally returned. He told my grandmother that my stepmother was pregnant, the family was burdened, and he wouldn't be taking me back. He left 300,000 dong behind and hurriedly departed. From beginning to end, he didn't even hug me once. After that day, my father never came back. I was left in the village, living with my grandmother, who made a living collecting scrap. She loved me dearly, pouring all her affection into me to make up for what I lacked. But every time I saw other children holding hands with their parents, I still felt sad and secretly cried alone. Whenever that happened, Ethan Carter would suddenly show up, looking just like a little monkey covered in mud. Sometimes, he'd place wild fruits he had picked from the mountains into my hands. Other times, he'd bring me a fish he had caught from the river. He would pat my head and confidently say, "Little Samantha King, don't be afraid. As long as I have food, you won't go hungry. They don't care for you, so from now on, I will." In my childhood, it was Ethan Carter who healed me. As the evening fell, golden sunlight stretched along the banks of the small river. I sat on a rock by the river, resting my chin on my hand, watching Ethan Carter, over 6 feet 3 inches, catching fish in the water. He wore a black shirt and black trousers. His expensive trousers were rolled up to his knees, and he held a borrowed fishing net from a local household, looking quite amusing. After fumbling around for ages, he managed to catch just one tiny fish, barely the size of a hand. I suspected the fish must have been blind to have swum straight into his net. As night fell, we lit a fire by the riverbank and grilled the fish that Ethan Carter had worked so hard to catch. Looking at his soaked and disheveled appearance, I couldn't help but laugh. Feeling embarrassed, Ethan Carter pretended to sulk and refused to talk to me. But I had to admit, the freshly caught fish tasted delicious when grilled. After the meal, we held hands and walked back. Seizing the moment when he wasn't paying attention, I jumped onto his back and playfully whined, "I've been walking all day, I'm so tired, and my feet hurt. Carry me home, will you?" Ethan Carter carried me on his back and deliberately ran fast. The mountain path was uneven. A few times, I almost fell, so scared that I clung tightly to his neck. In the empty valley, our laughter echoed, as if the whole world only had the two of us. This moment reminded me of when we were kids. We once sneaked up the mountain to catch fireflies, but ended up getting lost. Ethan Carter carried me, groping step by step through the forest all night. It wasn't until morning that the villagers found us. That time, Grandma was so angry she chased us around the yard with a broom. "You two are so bold. Aren't you afraid of being eaten by wild wolves or beasts on the mountain? Let's see if I don't give you a good beating today." We ran around the small yard, laughing and teasing Grandma, knowing she couldn't catch us. Chapter 5. At 3 in the morning, the distant skyscrapers stood silently, with only a few windows faintly glowing with weak light. In the past, every time I returned from Hilltown, I always felt the journey home was endlessly long. But tonight, the trip felt strangely short. Just a few dozen kilometers, the car sped so fast that I couldn't clearly see the scenery along the way. In the blink of an eye, we were already downstairs. The motion sensor light at the entrance was broken, leaving the hallway in complete darkness. Lately, it's been a relief to have Ethan Carter accompany me. It's the only reason I'm less afraid of the dark. "This is as far as you go, Ethan Carter." When I turned to look at him, tears almost welled up in my eyes. "You already knew, didn't you? That night, your mother came here. That's why you stayed in the car for so long, smoked so many cigarettes, because you didn't know how to face me, right?" That night, I stood behind the living room curtain, watching his car parked downstairs. For as long as he sat in the car, I stood there watching. But neither of us said anything about it. Ethan Carter tilted his head, gazing out the car window, unable to look at me. "In the end, you couldn't hold back and said it out loud." Although his body was tightly constrained by the suit, its taut lines seeming as if they might tear the fabric apart, it still couldn't stop him from trembling slightly. I bit my lip, feeling a pang of sorrow, but I forced myself to smile. "Ethan Carter, you're a very good man, truly a good man. But life is long, and there's so much we need to do. We shouldn't be trapped by emotions." Ethan Carter suddenly grew agitated, slamming his fist hard against the steering wheel. "But I only want to marry you. Only you. I want to spend my entire life with the person I love. Is that wrong? Why does everyone say I'm wrong? What did I do wrong?" The man who was once so proud and confident now seemed as if every joint in his body had been broken, his entire being on the verge of shattering. "Samantha King, tell me, why do I have to bear responsibility for people who have nothing to do with me? Why must it be me?" He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, tears streaming down his resolute face. Sometimes I think to myself, if they've already abandoned me, then let me disappear forever. Why did they have to find me again, point their fingers at me, and tell me I must carry the entire Carter family on my shoulders, that I must uphold the family's honor? Why? From beginning to end, no one ever asked me if I wanted this. Whether I wanted the title of heir or not. Tears brimmed in my eyes, spilling over, and I didn't even dare to blink. Hesitating, my trembling hand reached out, gently embracing Ethan Carter, afraid that if I held him any tighter, he might truly break apart. From a young age, Ethan Carter had always worked harder than anyone else. While feeding the pigs, he recited Tang poetry. While cutting grass, he studied the multiplication table. Without books, without pens, he used a tree branch to draw on the ground, calculating and reviewing what he had learned in class. Even in the freezing winter, his hands cracked and swollen, he still persevered in studying. Back then, I often asked him, "Ethan Carter, why do you try so hard?" His small eyes sparkled as he looked toward the distant mountains and said, "Because I want to be someone useful in the future. I want the people in this village, those who have nothing to eat, to be able to eat their fill. I want those without homes to have a place to shelter from the rain and wind. I want the children who can't go to school to step into classrooms. I hope our country becomes better, and our lives improve." Ethan Carter's heart was that vast. I couldn't bind him. The atmosphere in the car was suffocatingly heavy. It took a long while for Ethan Carter's emotions to gradually calm down. In a pleading voice, he softly said, "Samantha King, don't give up, okay? Give me a little more time and I'll handle everything." I leaned my head on his shoulder, gently shaking my head, "No. Ethan Carter, if there were another way, you wouldn't have married the Carter family's daughter 2 years ago. If you could let go of your responsibilities, disregard the rise and fall of the Carter family, not care about the thousands of employees in the corporation, you wouldn't have waited until now to come back to me. In truth, you made your decision long ago." The arms holding me tightened momentarily before loosening. Unknowingly, tears streamed down my face. "Ethan Carter, I truly want to be your wife. Ever since I was little, that thought has taken root in my heart. But I cannot use this love to bind you. I don't want you to give up everything for me, nor do I want you to regret today's decision years from now. Ethan Carter, love is about acceptance, not possession." After breaking up with Ethan Carter, I submitted my resignation at the company. I decided to become a volunteer teacher. This decision came to me on my way back from Hilltown. Seeing the innocent faces of the children at the village school, their pure smiles moved me to want to contribute in some small way to help. Somehow, Miles Thompson found out about my breakup. He was waiting for me downstairs. In just a few days, he had visibly lost weight, his scruffy beard growing untamed, looking worn and weary. When he saw me return, he approached me, "Even if we've broken up, we can still be friends, right? Won't you invite me up for a bit?" Miles Thompson no longer carried his previous arrogance, instead, there was an unfamiliar quietness about him. I stuffed my hands into my coat pockets and calmly replied, "Say what you need to say here." On raised his right hand for me to see, where a long, distinct scar ran across his wrist. "The doctor said my right hand is as good as useless now. I won't be able to hold a paintbrush anymore." Even though Miles Thompson was a terrible man, I knew he truly loved painting. Not being able to hold a brush anymore was like losing half his life. "If you're waiting for some comforting words from me, sorry, I don't have any." "Miles." Thompson let out a bitter laugh. "Samantha King, why didn't I realize, before how indifferent you could be? Don't you want to know why I got into that fight that night?" I shook my head. "I don't want to know." But Miles Thompson still spoke, "Because they said you'd never come back to me. I didn't believe it, so I fought them." I didn't want to hear any more, but he grabbed my hand, preventing me from leaving. "Samantha King, you're single now, and so am I. Why don't we give it another try? It was my fault before, but I'll change." I turned back, astonished as I looked at Miles Thompson. I never thought he would lower himself to speak to me like this. His hair was disheveled, falling over his forehead. His once bright, slightly defiant eyes now resembled a deep lake shrouded in mist. Samantha King, that night, when I was rushed into the emergency room, all I could think about was you. I just wanted to taste your egg fried rice again. At that moment, I told myself, if I walked out of that place alive, I'd come back to find you. I shook off Miles Thompson's hand, looked into his eyes brimming with emotion, and laughed. Miles Thompson, who are you putting on this lovesick act for? I glanced around, mocking. Could it be that someone is hiding in a pile of straw nearby, and you're all playing some cruel prank, using me as a bet? It's not like that, Samantha King. The corners of Miles Thompson's lips curved downward into a bitter line as he hurriedly explained. I sighed, deciding to speak plainly. Miles Thompson, do you remember the first time we met? That day, I was on my period, crouched in front of the hospital doors. You walked by and tossed your coat to me. I looked up and saw you standing there under the sunlight, your face glowing so brightly that it made me cry. You even said, "It's just a coat, no need to get so emotional." I looked straight into Miles Thompson's eyes, my gaze unwavering and resolute. A coat isn't worth getting emotional over. But your actions at that moment reminded me immediately of Ethan Carter, because he used to protect me in the same way. At that time, Ethan Carter had gotten married and lost contact with me, and my grandmother was gravely ill. I was completely broken. And you just happened to appear at the moment I needed Ethan Carter the most, and coincidentally, you bore a slight resemblance to him. You even once asked me why I never got jealous whenever you brought another girl home. My voice was cold yet calm. I never loved you. I only temporarily saw you as the shadow of Ethan Carter, to lull myself to sleep and try to move on. Miles Thompson's eyes were filled with disbelief, tears welling up as if they were about to fall. Impossible. Samantha King, you love me. When I was sick, you took care of me. When I was angry, you forgave me. How could you not love me? I maintained a calm demeanor, unmoved by his pain. Miles Thompson, you hurt me once, and I deceived you too. In this relationship, neither of us is innocent, we both deserve what has happened. Miles Thompson's body slumped slightly, as if carrying a burden of 1,000 pounds. He still couldn't believe my words. Taking a deep breath, I said, Miles Thompson, you don't love me as much as you think. You're just hurt because your pride was wounded, rejected so suddenly, and you can't accept it. Don't look for me anymore. Goodbye. Chapter 6. Having said that, I turned around and walked toward the unit door. Strangely enough, the motion sensor light, which had been broken for a year, suddenly lit up tonight. I froze in place, the blinding white light stinging my eyes. From behind, Miles Thompson's voice echoed again. I was wrong. Samantha King. I truly know I was wrong. His voice was hoarse, dry, as if worn down by sandpaper, but Samantha King, I genuinely like you. Even I don't know when I started liking you. Can you give me another chance? Forget all the unhappy things in the past, let's try again. I let my hands fall to my sides, not turning back. Miles Thompson shouted in despair from behind, Samantha King, Ethan Carter will never marry you. Even if you wait until the end of time, it's useless. My steps faltered. Looking at the motion sensor light in front of me flickering on and off, before shining brightly again, I chuckled softly. Who says that being in love means you have to be together? The dazzling light from above seemed to pierce through my body, shining straight into my heart. For the rest of my life, I will never love anyone else again. The day I left, Ethan Carter drove me to the airport. He was driving, I sat in the passenger seat, and both of us remained silent. Outside, a light drizzle floated in the air. When we were little, Ethan Carter and I often shared a torn umbrella. Every time, he would tilt the umbrella toward me, leaving himself almost entirely soaked. Once, he caught a severe cold and had a high fever for several days. I sat by his side. Tears and snot streaming down, crying endlessly, afraid he wouldn't make it. Ethan Carter woke up because my crying was too noisy. He weakly frowned and used his finger to push my forehead away. You crybaby, you've wiped your snot all over my hand. If someone knew, they'd think I just had a cold. If they didn't, they'd think I had some serious illness. Annoyed, I huffed and puffed a few times before saying, "Don't talk nonsense." Ethan Carter chuckled. He looked at me very seriously and said, "You cry so much, what will you do in the future without me?" "So, little Samantha King, when we grow up, I'll marry you." I happily nodded and even hooked my pinky with his promise. When we grow up, Ethan Carter has to marry Samantha King. At some point, tears had already rolled down my cheeks. I quickly raised my hand to wipe them away, not wanting Ethan Carter to see. But when I turned back, I noticed his eyes were red. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his body trembling slightly, and the sight of it made my heart ache. At the airport security checkpoint, the crowd bustled back and forth. I tried to smile. "Ethan Carter, make sure to eat on time, don't drink too much iced coffee, and take good care of yourself, okay?" Ethan Carter forced a faint smile. "Got it, you're so naggy. When you arrive, remember to text me." I choked back tears and softly replied, "Okay. I'm going now." Ethan Carter took a deep breath, furrowed his brows, then relaxed, as if trying hard to suppress his emotions. He spoke with difficulty, "Go." I forced a smile. Then, pulling my luggage, I turned and walked inside. Each step felt like it was treading on my heart, so heavy it left me breathless. I tried to hold myself together, refusing to cry. By the 10th step, my suppressed emotions reached their peak. I dropped the suitcase, turned around, and ran as fast as I could toward Ethan Carter. He opened his arms wide, catching me and holding me tightly. "Ethan Carter, I love you. I love you so much that I don't even know what to do." As I said those words, tears streamed down my face like rain, my voice choked with sobs. Ethan Carter buried his face into my neck, nodding firmly, his voice hoarse. "I know, Samantha King, I know everything." Reluctantly, I pulled away from his embrace, slowly raising my trembling hands. My fingertips gently brushed across his face. Ethan Carter clasped my hand tightly, pressing it against his cheek, unable to resist, kissing my palm. Finally, after a deep gaze into his eyes, I bit my lip, withdrew my hand from his grasp, turned, and walked away. This time, I didn't look back. When the plane started taxiing on the runway, I suddenly realized there was a ring box in my bag. Opening it, inside was a diamond ring shaped like a six-pointed star. Sometimes, a collapse happens in just a single moment. Tears streamed down my face, emotions suppressed throughout the journey, tearing at my heart. I clenched the ring tightly in my hand, my fist repeatedly pounding against my chest, the pain in my heart twisting so intensely that I couldn't breathe. The person sitting next to me, not understanding what was happening, hurriedly called the flight attendant. The flight attendant supported my trembling body and asked worriedly, "Miss, are you okay? Do you need to get off the plane?" I couldn't respond, I could only shake my head repeatedly, waving my hand. But my heart felt as though it had been crushed to pieces. After returning from the airport, Ethan Carter drove to my house. He slowly pushed open the familiar door. Everything in the house remained intact as before, but every corner exuded a loneliness that tore at the soul. His gaze stopped at the sofa in the living room, where we used to sit together watching movies. I held a bag of chips, laughing heartily. "Ethan Carter, this actor is so good. He's making me laugh so hard my stomach's going to burst." On the dressing table in the bedroom, the comb I used was still there, with a few strands of my hair lingering on it. "Ethan Carter, can you help me comb my hair?" Memories of the mornings we woke up together came rushing back. I always nestled my head into his chest, acting coy. "Ethan Carter, how many kids will we have in the future?" "At least 2, right? An older brother and a younger sister. The brother will protect his sister." The sweet memories of the past had now turned into sharp needles piercing deep into his heart. Ethan Carter's legs gradually lost their strength, and he collapsed onto the floor, his body writhing in pain. In his hand was the watch I had left behind, clenched so tightly that it nearly imprinted on his skin. Tears streamed endlessly down his face, soaking the front of his shirt. From his throat came suppressed sobs, each choking gasp causing his body to tremble violently, the pain so intense he could barely breathe. Little Ethan Carter and little Samantha King, in the end, still lost each other. 2 years later. I heard from friends about Miles Thompson. Ever since he could no longer paint, his life had fallen into disarray. Eventually, he sold his art studio, left the city, and lived alone. No one knew where he had gone. He cut off all contact with everyone. Ethan Carter, as expected, became a renowned young entrepreneur. As for me, I wasn't far behind. I, along with another female teacher from the school, was recognized by the city as an outstanding educator. That day, my colleague and I shared a car to attend the award ceremony. While waiting at a red light at an intersection, I accidentally caught sight of the LED screen on a nearby shopping center broadcasting a live interview program. Ethan Carter shone like a star, confidently standing amidst a crowd of media. Dozens of cameras were pointed at him, as if trying to capture every expression and slightest movement. The perfectly tailored suit accentuated his broad shoulders and long legs, with every crease meticulously designed, exuding unparalleled sophistication and elegance. Since our farewell at the airport, it had been 2 years since we last met. During holidays or special occasions, we occasionally exchanged congratulatory messages. But I know, you once came looking for me. Even if you were standing from afar, I could recognize you immediately. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my wrist. Turning around, I saw my colleague gripping my hand tightly, her eyes sparkling. Wow, Miss King, that man is so handsome. I looked at Ethan Carter on the screen and nodded, yes, very handsome. On the program, Ethan Carter smiled gently, his deep voice resonating. I hope we can work together to ensure more children have access to education. The reporter continued to ask, Mr. Carter, I participated in several of your interviews. I've noticed you always wear this watch. Is it a gift from your wife? I looked at the watch on Ethan Carter's wrist, and tears welled up uncontrollably. It was the watch I had intentionally left in his car the day he drove me to the airport. Ethan Carter lowered his head, his gaze resting on the watch. The strap fit snugly around his wrist, and the watch face emitted a gentle glow under the light. Old memories, moments of joy and tenderness, surged back like a tidal wave, filling his mind, like stars shimmering in his heart. After a few seconds, Ethan Carter lifted his head, faced the camera, and smiled. Yes, this is a gift from my wife. My right hand unconsciously touched the diamond ring on the ring finger of my left hand. My colleague noticed my gesture, her eyes showing admiration. Miss King, your wedding ring is so beautiful. Wedding ring? Yes, isn't a diamond ring on the ring finger a wedding ring? I was stunned for a moment, then looked up, my gaze fixed on Ethan Carter on the screen, the corners of my lips slightly curved. Yes, this is a gift from my husband.